Hello, my name is Amanda Poss. I'm the Gallery Director for Hillsborough Community College. I'm delighted to see you all here with us as we celebrate the opening of our newest exhibition, Rampolla, 3 Generations Illuminate Human Dignity, featuring photographs by Ron Rampolla, paintings by his late father, Frank Rampolla, and research by Ron's daughter, Selena Rampolla, a recent HCC alumna. I want to say a few quick notes about our Zoom meeting before we get started with tonight's event. We are recording, as you might have noticed, and if you want to know right away when any of our new digital content is available, all you have to do is subscribe to our YouTube channel at Gallery221HCC. Throughout tonight's event, we'll share images and speaker videos, and when we do this, Zoom automatically creates a sidebar with attendee videos. If this disrupts your ability to see any of the presentation content, you can minimize the sidebar or change the way it appears by selecting the icon on the top left and change to speaker view during the event. You know, during gallery receptions pre-COVID-19, one of my favorite parts of these was seeing everyone, hearing from our community members and students, listening to their responses and their questions about the show. However, you might have noticed that for our virtual event, you're all muted. However, we still want you to talk to us. Just use the chat. I encourage you to participate in the chat section by saying hello, giving a shout out, emphasizing something that you saw or that you heard that you particularly enjoyed, and especially ask questions. We'll have some time for Q&A at the end, so leave your questions in the chat at any time and we'll address them during the Q&A in the order in which they appear. Finally, as a quick heads up, at the end of tonight's event, we have a special treat for you guys. We'll be replaying a slideshow of exhibition photos for you all to enjoy. And at the same time, we'll be sharing with you some recordings of Selena as she talks about the artworks on display, her family, and possible meanings behind the things that are on view. So make sure you stick around for that. Now it is my pleasure to introduce to you Travis Meek, a professor of humanities at the HCC Dale Mabry Campus, for a few words of welcome. Travis, go ahead when you're ready and unmute.
Thank you, Amanda.
Hi, Travis.
How you doing? I thought I'd start off the welcome tonight by treating everybody a little bit like students. And I'm sorry for that, but I'm a teacher, so that's what I do. You know, every semester, I relay to my students that I love my job. And I love my job, I tell them, because I get to tell stories for a living. You know, stories raise us, they envelop us in our family, in our culture, in our world. Stories tether us to the past and carry our memories into the future. To connect to these stories is to be part of a conversation that is anywhere from 300,000 years old to 14 billion years old. Stories can delight us or bring us a tear. They can be instructive in the way that they allow us to avoid pitfalls that have plagued others in the past, or to enjoy for ourselves those things that others have found sublime. Stories are all around us. In works of literature, sure, but in music, in dance, in the wood of the forest, and in every experience anyone has ever had, or that will be. Now, you might be a little curious about why I'm giving this welcome, and to be sure, I was surprised as well when Amanda asked me to do it, but I think that'll become clear here in a moment. I mean, I'm not a college president, I'm not even a campus president, heck, I'm not even a dean, and I'm definitely not our shining example of a dean, Dustin Lemke. But I think I can clarify it a little bit by telling you a story. So about 2 years ago, almost exactly 2 years ago now, I had the pleasure of having Selena as a student in my Introduction to Humanities class. And for an assignment in that class, which was to connect humanistic discipline with certain themes that we as human beings all go through throughout our lives, and we've always went throughout our various civilizations, is to make a connection between those two. And in Selena's paper, she connected Michelangelo's Pietà to David's Death of Marat and her own grandfather's work, Lacrimosa, in memory of J.F. Kennedy. The paper revealed intertextuality of works and artists sharing similar stories through shared symbolism across the centuries. The paper told such a good story and was so well researched that I encouraged Selena to do more with it than just turn it in for a grade. To my delight, she agreed, and I set up a meeting between our esteemed gallery director and art historian, Amanda Poss, as well as Kathleen King, who is the director of the Honors Institute. That meeting was a beginning that would lead to Selena sharing her work with a broader audience, as well as setting the groundwork for the exhibit you'll see this evening. Now, earlier this week, I had the pleasure of visiting the exhibit. And as I walked around, taking in the works and reading many of the didactics, which, as Amanda stated, were written by Selena, I was reminded how powerful stories can be, how stories link us to our family across generations. They link us to the depths of ourselves and to our humanity. And as I said before, stories are all around us. All we have to do is listen. So without further ado, and on behalf of Gallery 221 and Hillsborough Community College and Dale Mabry Campus, I'd like to welcome you to this story, a story told through art and literature, the story of Rampolla. 3 generations illuminate human dignity. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Travis, for that really warm, very genuine words of welcome. I'm so glad, I know you said you were surprised, but I'm so glad that you agreed and gave our audience a little bit of a behind the scenes into what inspired the exhibition that we're celebrating tonight.
I'm really grateful for you for letting me be a part of it.
Of course. So speaking of saying thank you to people, I have a few folks I want to recognize for their support before we begin our panel discussion. So first, the HCC Dale Mabry Student Government Association and Student Activities for their support of the gallery. It's their contributions that make all of our exhibitions and programming possible. My thanks also to our college administration, the HCC Dale Mabry Campus President, Dr. Alan Witt, and our current Dean for the Associate in Arts, Amy Bousquet, for their support of the arts at our campus. I'm also personally very grateful always to my Gallery 221 team, Emiliano Sedicasi and Mark Miller, as well as our volunteer, Sabrina Douglas, all of whom helped put this event together and are working behind the scenes tonight. And then my thanks to our panelists and to Travis. Thank you so much for being here, sharing your time and your expertise with us. So now, Ron, Selena, go ahead and turn on your videos and unmute. And as we get started, I just want to remind our audience one last time that our session will end with some Q&A. So please, I highly encourage you to type your questions into the chat at any point, especially if you're a student. Let us know and we'll try to especially get to your questions at the end tonight. So Ron, hello.
Hi.
Selena, you here as well?
Hello. Okay. Who wants to go first?
Okay. Let's begin with some introductions. Ron, go ahead.
Okay. I'm Ron. I go by Ron. My formal name is Renato. Selena, I'm Selena's dad. I don't think I need to say anything further than that, but my father was an artist, and I grew up in the all-around art, and I started taking pictures as a child and also sculpting. My father had me doing both, and my father died early, so I never really had an opportunity to talk with him as an adult. But I went on with sculpting, and also I play guitar and with my music and taking pictures. And I actually went to HCC and graduated there before I went to USF. But I had some of the best teachers at HCC. And I took a photography class with Susan Camp Crosby, who I think just retired a few years ago. And I had Jerry Meatyard. He took an interest in me. He was a sculptor there, and he taught me about composition and texture and a lot of things that I don't know, a lot of sculpting things and a lot of composition. So I would go around taking pictures of people in Ybor City. And Emilio, I don't know if you're available, but can you show some of these pictures? Okay, this is some cigar workers in Ybor, and we can just go right through. And see, everything that I took pictures of was of the human form or a face. Now, if you know the history of Ybor City, in around 1965, we had urban renewal. And this house that's behind there is up on stilts, ready to be moved. It's been there for years at the time. And everybody, there was about 1,000 people that had to move out. So I call this particular photograph urban renewal. This was done around 1979, 1980. So this was a man on 7th Avenue I met. I just took his picture. He was nice enough to pose for me with a cigar. And I continued to do this for a while, taking pictures. And until this man, I call him Socrates. I don't know his name. I call him Socrates because he asked me a question. He said, why did you want my picture? I mean, I'm happy to give it to you, but why did you want to take my picture? I said, well, I thought you had an interesting face. And well, what makes my face interesting? And I really didn't have an answer to him. And it really sent me on a whole another quest for understanding why, because we didn't have any Jackson Pollock's books. We didn't have any abstract art. All we had was figurative. Rembrandt, Caravaggio, Michelangelo, Da Vinci, Goya. We didn't have anything other than that. So to me, that was decoration. So it was a very snobbish attitude when I was 19 about this. And I learned so much more about it. And so that was that. I call him Socrates because he asked me a question I never asked myself. And I really learned by that encounter. And I feel I have grown quite a bit because of it. That's in a nutshell.
Thank you so much, Ron. Selena, we'll invite you to tell our audience a little bit about yourself.
Hello, everyone. My name is Selena Rampolla, and I am an HCC alumnus and a former honors student. I graduated in the spring of this year, and I'm currently in my first semester at USF as a psychology major. At the beginning of my second year at HCC, I took an honors course, Intro to Humanities with Professor Meek, who you met earlier. And in this class, I wrote a research paper on the topic of art and death and dying, and I made connections to my grandfather's painting, The Lacrimosa for JFK. And Professor Meek encouraged me to continue this research topic, and this led me to present a poster about my grandfather's piece at the National Collegiate Honors Council annual conference, and I went with the Lydia R. Daniel Honors Program. And this was 1 year after I completed the research paper. And so here we are another year later within an art show of my family's work. So it's amazing to see how this unfolded after 2 years. That's it.
Thank you both so much for sharing a little bit for our audience. So now I want to get into some of my questions for you both. A really crucial dynamic of this exhibition is centered on your family, beginning with Frank Rampolla. So tell us a little bit about him and his artwork.
Would you like me to answer, or Selena, or?
However you both would like.
Of course not, I'll be glad to.
I'll refer to you.
What's that?
Go ahead.
Okay. My father's work was obviously what's considered figurative expressionist. And to me, figurative expression is basically distorting the human figure in such a way as to invoke emotion. And that's how to paint expression in that sense. The works on the left is one by Craig Rubidoux, which was one of my father's best friends. You can see it's not a realistic rendition of a flamenco dancer, but you get the gist of what it is. And the colors, the reds all mean something, and the blues, and I'm sure a psychologist can explain much better than I could what everything means, but it does have some motion to it. The one on the right is by Lynn Davison, who's actually has done very well for herself, and she was a student of my father's, and her work is just extremely powerful as well.
I'll say a quick something about my grandfather's work. Are you done?
No, that's fine.
Okay. His work deals with the fundamental issues of humankind, like loneliness, despair, war, and hope. And he does this through the use of the figure and some liturgical themes.
Yeah, the figure it's both safe and it's dangerous. It's safe because it's been done for thousands of years, And it's dangerous because it can be so easily identifiable.
Yeah, I think I'm going to add in there, Frank's exploration of the human subject is so very visceral and expressed through this very recognizable figurative expressionism style that emerged quite strongly in the US in the 1960s. And it imparts something really, I think, potent for anyone who stands in front of it, just in especially the way that he renders the human figure in his paintings. But oh, go ahead, Ron.
Sorry, I was just going to say, for instance, on the Pietà, or the Lacrimosa for JFK, it's based on Michelangelo's Pietà. If you look at this, and Bruce Mars actually explained this to me, you can see, we talk about figurative expression, how figurative expression distorts the human form to invoke emotion. Well, if you can look at the leg, there's no way a leg can do that. It's the foot that's coming toward the corner from the woman, and it's though you're standing right next to the foot, and you're starting there, and you walk back, and then you see. And to me, I call this stream of consciousness painting, because he's not trying to illustrate exactly what was there. He's trying to illustrate, he's recording his emotion in real time. These white spots that you see here, they're not white paint. That's gesso. When you prepare a canvas, you put gesso on it, and then you paint over it. Normally, you paint over the whole canvas. He intentionally left this blank. He wanted you to see what he felt. And this is how he felt in real time.
I think all of those little imperfections, you know, it shows he created it in one night, the night that JFK died. That's what makes it so powerful, is that he didn't stop until it was finished.
Raw and passion.
Mm-hmm. I think this idea of recording emotions, even imperfections, and caught in an instant, as you said, Selena, is a really nice segue for our next question, which is for you, Ron. Ron, your photographs likewise focus on the dignity of the human figure. And I would invite you to tell our audience more about the two series that are included in this exhibition, which are Dignity No Matter What and Introspection.
Okay, Dignity No Matter What is what I started out doing. And I like to do street photography where I go around taking pictures. So I can walk all day doing that. And then I like to highlight things that people don't notice, and either just a position or just something very beautiful. But why walk past human beings just because they're living on the street? So why don't I highlight them? So I started taking pictures of people. I'd meet them, and I don't take any pictures that are where they don't know I'm taking the picture, or I don't have their permission. I usually talk to them. I have a story for everybody on the screen right now. And, you know, they're not actually sad stories, but the one on the bottom left, I'll mention, smoking a cigarette. His name is Mario, and he's actually a good friend now. He's no longer homeless. He was homeless at the time. He's living in a trailer in the country, and he has a phone, and we talk probably every 2 weeks. One of us call each other every 2 weeks just to see how we're doing. Very sharp guy. He lived in Cuba. He worked all his life. He's a hard worker. Just a really nice guy. So we used to walk all around Ybor City, in the north part of Ybor City, some of the areas that aren't great to go with an expensive camera. And we'd walk, and he'd say, "I'll be your bodyguard." Now, he's 70 years old. He's somewhat frail, but he had street credit. You know, people didn't mess with Mario. And we hung out together. Since I'm Mario's friend, people didn't mess with me. So it was fun, and we got to meet a lot of people and hear a lot of stories together as well.
And then your introspection series, which for our audience here, joining us on Zoom, a little more backstory. This show was originally set to take place in the summer, and we had to postpone due to COVID-19. And in that interim period, you developed that new series, Introspection, which was a happy surprise for us. And we were thrilled to be including the new series in the show. So tell them about that series and how it evolved.
Sure. Thank you so much for bringing it up. COVID-19 happened. And my style of taking pictures is I go up, if you're on the street, I talk to you, and if we get a conversation, sometimes we don't, but if we do, I sit down with you and we talk just like we're, old friends. And I use a very small lens. It's called a 24 millimeter lens. So when I take pictures, I want people to see their humanity, their soul, not their circumstance. So I'm not interested in environmental shots. I want you to look straight in their eyes, see everything about them. I want you to smell their breath. I want my photos to be that close. So COVID-19 hits, and it's not really the best thing to do anymore. Everybody's wearing masks. I went out a couple times. I used a longer lens. It just didn't feel it, So I said, what? I still have to create. So what I did is I started looking through old photos and looking at, I also take pictures of graffiti for fun, and urban graffiti and stuff like that. I mixed it together. Even things with this one on the left of the woman is basically like 3 or 4. It's a set of windows. I put it a little bit askewed, and it's some urban graffiti on top of this woman who, to me, shows every bit of dignity right there, the way her expression is, and that was it. The one on the right is basically I put a geometric shape over him. To me, that just describes 2020.
I love that, and you said this before in describing your work, how you attempt to show us their soul, not their circumstance. And I would like to emphasize that. And Selena, if you could kind of chip in, you have accompanied your father as he's gone and taken many of these photographs. So what are some of the things you've noticed as you've been with him taking these images?
So I've noticed how I was surprised on how like he wouldn't appear scared when approaching them or hesitant. He'd treat them like a normal human being because that's what they are. And so, especially when he first started doing it, it was new, and so I kind of felt scared because but I trusted him. So I remember driving around in the car, and he had printed photos out of some of the people that he took pictures of, and he was going to go and give them some water, some food, and also give them their picture, and they'd look at it in awe and be like, wow, I look amazing. I remember one woman said that, and that just made me smile.
And then Ron, you put many of these into books.
Correct. Yeah. The Dignity series, I put into a book called Dignity No Matter What, The Light Within. And I set up an arrangement with Blanket Tampa Bay, which is a local nonprofit. So they got all the net proceeds of the book. And we sold almost 300 copies of the book. And now I'm actually done a revised edition, which I'm just going to do book on. I don't want to print anymore. It's too much hassle. So what I'm doing is doing a revised edition available through my website for a print-on-demand type book. And I did a couple magazines. One is, this is the one book here is Introspection. It's actually a magazine. And then I did another book of street portraits. And it's actually a magazine as well. So that's what I've been up to,
Keeping quite busy, right?
I enjoy it.
Now, Selena, back to you for a minute, talking more about what you wrote and contributed for this show. Of course, as we've been discussing, you wrote all the labels, and your voice just creates this lovely through line for the entire exhibition. And in one of the labels, you mentioned growing up surrounded by your grandfather's work, but that you never met him, never spoke to him, and yet you seem to have this very powerful and intuitive connection to his work, which is evident in the research that you presented at the conference following Travis's class at HCC. So tell us more about what it was like growing up surrounded by your grandfather's and your father's artworks and how that has influenced you.
Well, regarding my grandfather's work, I remember when I was really young, I was scared of it. When I was about 3 or 4, my grandmother would have me take a nap in the quietest room in the house, which happened to have many of my grandfather's painting in it. And the only piece of furniture in the room was my bed, which was surrounded by paintings that were dark in nature and much bigger than me. So needless to say, I felt quite unsettled during that time. However, as I got older, I grew an appreciation for his work as I learned more about it. And regarding my father's work, oh, it's wonderful. I actively watched his recent photography develop, starting with his Dignity series a couple of years ago. I remember helping him learn how to use his editing software so he could adjust his photos. And now he teaches me how to use it because it's been so long and he does it more than I do now. And last year, I watched him give multiple presentations about his Dignity series and his experience with homeless people and his book, Dignity No Matter What, The Light Within. And this was around the same time that I was conducting research on my grandfather's piece, The Lacrimosa for JFK. So it was very exciting to see all of our work come together in this show.
Yeah, for most people, they tend to have a connection with, Ron's photographs separately and Frank's paintings, which have been exhibited quite widely. He was a professor at the Ringling and much beloved locally, as work even in the Smithsonian collection. But whenever we would go in preparation for the show to the studio and the storage where all of these works are, they commingle in this really interesting way. And we try to bring a spirit of that into the exhibition to see them on the wall this way. We're just so thrilled to share a little bit of that experience. So in talking a little bit about this year and how obviously it's had an impact on the show, I think 2020 has put into sharp focus how important it is to have empathy and respect for our fellow human beings, which is a central theme for this show. I also recall, Selena, that at one point in the labels you write, "Art leads to action," which I think is so striking. So how do you both feel about the future and for art with everything that has happened?
Selena, you want to go or you want me?
I can go, yeah.
Okay.
So everyone is in the same boat, right? Like we all have to adopt this new way of living, and we've experienced similar struggles and limitation as a result of this pandemic. For example, the show, like you said, was supposed to go through the summer this year instead of the fall, but I'm glad that we were able to have it despite everything going on. And one of the beauties of art is that it's adaptable. And I'm proud of my father for creating his introspection series during quarantine. He utilized the resources that he had.
It looks like we've lost Selena for a second. Ron, do you want to jump in for a minute while we wait for her connection to come back?
And she's welcome. She's in the other room. She's welcome to come join me. So, what I wanted to do was basically display emotion on a two-dimensional surface. And I think that my father's work dealt with loneliness, fear of loneliness. Everybody wants to be loved, anger, faith in some sort of divine, just whatever. It all transcends politics. This is about interdimensional. This is, to me, beyond that. Everybody wants to be loved. Everybody has certain fears. This is more, it's deeper than just, we're Democrat, we're Republican. It's not, it's beyond that. This is about human dignity, human life, and human core beliefs. I think we've lost Amanda.
Oh, here we go. Selena, you were talking about adaptation. and how proud you were of your father during this time. Can you expand a little bit more about that?
So what I mean by he used the resources he had is he didn't go out and take, well, there was no one out on the street, right? And it wasn't safe to interact with people, especially at the beginning of the year. So he took, like you said, graffiti and different types of architectural shapes. And I remember him getting excited about the double exposure concept. And he was telling me all about it, how he would put the images and overlay them on top of subjects and create this beautiful combination of color and black and white. And that's the addition of color is much different than his Dignity series. So I think just the pieces are very beautiful. The one that's with the red on the left, that one is my favorite.
Yeah, I think the color became a really great visual bridge too between Ron, your earlier series, the black and white photographs for Dignity No Matter What, and then your father's works, which, though they have these very bold, dark backgrounds often, and as you said, almost, Selena, a little bit psychologically dark, and you were almost intimidated as a kid, the use of color then in introspection, I think you can really see how you're not only reacting to the situation, but also I personally think it puts you in this closer parallel with your father's work.
You know, I don't know if I'm on.
Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, sorry. I'm new to this. One of my, Edward Hopper, and one of my favorite quotes by him, I love his use of light. He said, if I could say it in words, I wouldn't need to paint. And that's what, for me, my introspection series is, by putting collages or composites or whatever you want to call it, to me, it expresses what I might feel at the time. And I can't really put it into words. I'm not eloquent enough to do that. So I do it this way.
Which is why all of the images and introspection are untitled, to leave it up to the viewer.
Thank you. I forgot to mention that. Yeah, because each one has emotions to it and everybody can pretty much draw their own conclusion.
Yeah, I like that you point that out. I'm always telling my students that titles of artworks are like entry points into the work. And if an artist chooses not to title it by leaving it untitled, then they're forcefully directing us back to the artwork and not giving us sort of an easy out that we have to do the work and visually interrogate the piece and think about our reactions to it.
Half of it is what you bring to it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it's another little note about 2020, but thinking about your circumstances, thinking about your experiences and the value that is inherent to those experiences and making you what you are. So, and I actually want to follow up, and then we'll do one more question with just us, and then I want to open up for Q&A, because I see we have some comments trickling in. So it's a little note to our audience, go ahead and add your question now, because we'll be transitioning to that in just a moment. And Ron, you were talking about the use of light, and before this event, I was looking back through some more work and writings about your father, Frank. And Lynn Whitelaw at the Lipa Ratner Museum of Art at the time, who showed paintings by your father, was commenting how your dad is reacting to the turbulence of the time, especially in the 1960s. And that's a lot of the paintings that we have on display is from that period. The Vietnam War, the protests, the assassination of JFK, which Selena wrote about, and putting that all into these paintings, all of those emotions at the time, and the use of light, the dramatic tenebrism is also in conversation with history, like the Baroque period. And your photographs strike me as being quite similar, especially when we look at the black and whites and the dramatic contrast between the dark backgrounds and the lightness in the foreground and the figure. Emiliano, if you could put up some examples and we'll talk a little bit more about those and their stories, Ron.
The one on the left, his name is Colin. That was across from Madison Square Gardens. I was at a photography show, and I was staying at a place called the Hotel Pennsylvania in Manhattan. It's really kind of a dive, and so and Pink was just playing, and it was so loud, and people were everywhere. She had already finished her concert, but everybody's in the streets. It was very noisy. I couldn't sleep. It was about 1:30 in the morning, so I went downstairs, and I walked around a little bit, took some pictures, and I saw him, and we talked for a while. And I asked him, how long you been homeless? Because it was April, but it was cold. It was about 50 degrees or so, and he goes, well, I've been homeless off and on about 8 years. I said, well, what did you used to do? He goes, well, I was an audio engineer and did lighting and for concerts, but everything changed, and I didn't change with it, with the computers and all that. But a nice guy, bought him breakfast. The one in the middle is Robert. He's pretty much a good-looking guy, but he doesn't have any teeth, so he was a challenge to photograph. And he had, I'm sure it was the meth that he had gotten, all the drugs and stuff. And he had his wife with him and his dog, and then all his belongings piled up about as tall as he was. He was over 6 foot in a shopping cart, and they were going to somehow make it to Georgia because they felt the social services were better. He clearly at this point he had just given up. And Emma over here, she amazing. She's probably 90 pounds, and she had a sweatsuit on in the summer, and she was panhandling. I talked to her a little bit, and then I asked her about her a little bit, and we talked a little bit. I gave like $5 and got a protein bar, and she said basically she had stage 4 cancer. The doctor said she had 7 months to live. I said, well, why aren't you in hospice? Why aren't you in at least a shelter? And she goes, well, I was in a shelter and 2 guys tried to rape me, and I got a screwdriver stuck in my leg for getting away. And I said, well, what do you do? Where do you live? And she said with so much pride in her voice, she said, I live in the woods. And that was the last I saw of her. That was several years ago.
Well, I see we have some questions actually in follow-up to what you're saying now. So at this time, I want to invite Mark Miller, our student worker, to read us some of the questions from our audience.
Yes, hello. We have a question for Heather, actually. Question for Ron. Can you tell the story about Daniel Unheim and the Lady in the Woods?
The Lady in the Woods I just did.
Okay.
Daniel, do you have, it also he goes by David. Emiliano, do you have that one? That one, the one on the right. I actually followed him. I was in New York City in Soho, and he didn't have a shirt on. He was walking with shoelaces untied. He's about 6'4", 6'5", probably weighed 100 pounds, very skinny. You could see his ribs. So I was curious about him. So I followed him, and he went to this little portico of a vacant building, sat down, and he had already had blankets there and stuff. You could tell it was his bed for the night. And I sat down with him, and he said it was fine. I asked him, you mind if I sit down? He said, fine. And we talked a while, and it was 4:30, 6 o'clock or so in the evening, and he had been drinking, but he was functioning, and so he didn't really have any reason why, he was like this. But I asked him what his name was, and he told me, and I said, we talked a little bit, and he said, I really appreciate it. And I said, what? I haven't done anything. I haven't given you anything, nothing. And he goes, I appreciate you asked my name, and I appreciate that you're talking to me, not telling me to leave, that kind of thing. Usually when people talk to him, it's in a patronizing way. Like, here's $1, I feel better now, how about you? You know, that kind of thing. Or, but with him, the fact I just sat down and talked with him and showed him respect, that's worth more than any dollar I could have given.
Well, thank you so much for sharing that, Ron. There's a comment from Jane Hammond, and then I'll let Mark get our next question. She says, having spanned a number of decades, what I see differing between Frank's artistic expression and Ron and Selena's works is a modern cultural platform fueled by a technology that is able to reach so many communities of people while still being an artist witness. And that's a really lovely comment. Thank you, Jane. Okay, now Mark, what's our next question?
Thank you, Jane.
Yes. Can you elaborate on your father's studio process and then your editing process?
Is that to Selena?
I think that's for you.
Okay, elaborate on my what process?
Your father's studio process, and then for you, how you edit your photos.
There's actually, Emiliano has a picture of me with my father in 1968 in his studio. That's Bruckner on the back wall there. It's a painting of one of his, he liked Mahler, he liked Bruckner, and he's got in his left hand there a little pamphlet called The Jungle Book, and Disney movie had just come out, and I had asked him, I wanted him to draw Bubbaloo for me, but he'd be painting, he had one light above him, and everything else would be dark. So everything ended up being highly contrast, very vivid colors, because he was painting in very low light. And he'd had the studio, the studio would be blasting, usually with Bruckner or Mahler, really loud, distorted speakers. It sounded terrible by today's standards. And I would just be playing there with roaches in a box or something. You know, I would just kind of just watch, and I'd see him draw on the thing, and then he'd paint, and it was very, it was cathartic for him. I could tell. I mean, I didn't realize it at the time, but now I realized that this was his therapy. You know, this is how he dealt with life. We all need something like that, you know?
In your editing process, I like that you mentioned his listening to music, because it's quite similar for you as you edit, correct?
I like listening to music very loud, and I listen to different types of music, from classical to blues. I like old blues. I listen to it very loud, and the more aggressive the music is, I find the more adrenaline goes into my work, and the more laid back it is. So I mix up the music, you know, for that reason.
I'd like to say something as well, if that's okay.
Absolutely.
I saw the photo of my dad when he was younger and his dad, and my dad watching his dad paint and everything. And I noticed a parallel between me watching my dad edit his photos on a computer. I know that in the same position that they were in the photo is just like how I am next to him, my father, while he's editing on the computer and showing me this latest trick that he learned. So I thought that was pretty great.
All things come back around, right? All things in parallel. All right, Mark, what's our next question?
Question for Ron. Jose asks, has your relationship with the sisters ever continued beyond the initial portrait? Have you ever encountered or heard from them since? Is there a chance they may be aware of the project?
Of who?
So how has the relationship with the subjects, the sitters for your portraits, have they ever continued beyond that? Have you heard from them since? Are they aware of this project?
The one, when I travel across the country, and these pictures are from Boston, New York, Savannah, all around. But the ones here, yes. On occasion, I do go back and I talk to them. I give them a picture. Mario and I is probably the only ones that we ended up actually having a genuine friendship. And he's doing much better than he was. So yeah, to answer your question, yes, but for the most part, sometimes I never see them again. I look for them to give them a picture. There's one I gave a picture to, and it's in the show. And I spent an hour with them talking. I gave him water and so forth. And I went back a week later in the middle of the day with some pictures I took. Yeah, he was loving it because he was posing, he was doing all kinds of things. And he goes, "How did you get this? You don't remember? We talked, and we spent an hour together. And I told you I'd bring you a print back." And but he was pretty drunk, and it was like the middle of the day. So he wasn't drunk when I met with him, though. I mean, he was totally. I was still baffled as to why he was homeless. That was a long answer to your question. Sorry.
No, thank you for sharing that with us. Mark, do you have another question?
Yes. A question from Ron and then a question for Selena from Erica. The question from Ron says, is there any significance in the dark colors and squares that you use in your pictures? Do you have an artist besides your father that inspires you?
Oh gosh, very good question. Significance, like symbolic? No. It just happens. And it's just something I don't really think it through. Sometimes I have an idea. I say, well, it'd be cool to put some lines in this or a square here. And I'd start it. No, it seemed good, but it's not really what I want. And it just develops. And if I do it without music, it's not nearly as quick or as effective. So no, there's no symbolism that I know of that at least I intend to put in there. But yeah, that's basically it. And as far as artists, I like photographers like Alex Webb, a lot of street photographers, but I do like Caravaggio as far as painters. I'm kind of a sucker for Rembrandt and some of the old classics. It's probably not, good to mention because it's old school, but I do like the old school Renaissance painters.
I think we see that tenebrism and love of Caravaggio. He was my first art love.
Oh, really?
Going to the Art Institute in Chicago, yeah.
He was awesome.
Very seductive paintings.
He had a wild life, but I loved his art. Yeah. Everybody was showing everything. Again, I'm not an art historian, but my understanding is everybody was showing everything. There was nothing left to the imagination in a photo where he had the dark and the light. And it just, to me, that excites me because I don't want to see everything, Yeah,
that dramatic theater-like kind of approach. And then Mark, the second part for that question.
Yeah. Selena, Erica wants to know, how did you know you wanted to major in psychology?
Well, in my first semester at HCC in 2017, I joined Psychology Club on the Dale Mabry Campus and Psi Beta. And I met an amazing group of people, and I was active in that club for 3 years, and I'm still in contact with some of the people from that clubs. And I learned a lot because I took many psychology courses at HCC. I also participated in some research through HCC. So I wanted to continue that at USF, and that's what I'm doing.
I want to follow up to that because we talked about this a little bit prior to the event, and I think Selena, you can give some pretty direct feedback, but Ron, feel free to chip in too. What advice would you guys give to recent graduates like yourself, Selena, and Ron for artists? Things that you've learned.
Well, my suggestion is basically, and it sounds so hokey, but follow your heart as far as what you want to do. Don't say, well, on Instagram, this gets all the likes and this doesn't do as well. Or you follow they're going in this direction. All you're going to do is be a day late and $1 short. You need to kind of just do your own direction, go your own path, and not care about what everybody else is doing. That's just my advice.
I have a message for current students because I just graduated from HCC myself, and I'm still a student at USF. So my advice would be to take advantage of opportunities of all forms. I know it seems hard to find any because of the COVID situation, but they are there. They're in your classes, your classmates, professors, and your school wants you to be involved, and they want you to develop academically, professionally, and personally. And those experiences that you have, they will carry with you throughout your life, hopefully. And so take advantage of those opportunities, no matter their size, because just like my research paper in Professor Meek's class, they could lead to something bigger.
Such good advice, both of you. I want to give a shout out to Heather, who noted about a lot of the colors, Ron, in your work for introspection being primary, and how that intuitively represents something about the work and kind of like essential nature, right? And then Mark, go ahead and read our next question from Paula.
Yes, Paula wants to know, Ron, what kind of camera do you use?
I started with a Nikon D750, and now I use a Sony A7R3 with either a 24 millimeter lens or a 28 millimeter lens. Since COVID, though, I'm kind of, using my 55 millimeter lens because it gives me some distance, which is not what I like. That's one reason I'm doing the introspection, is I really like to be within a foot. My lens, when I take pictures, usually I want every little detail in there. So I'm 11 inches away with my lens from their nose. Pre-COVID.
I like how you had that little bit. Okay, Mark, next question.
Ron, have you been inspired by photographers such as Walker Evans and Dorothy Lange?
Oh, Dorothy Lange is one of my favorite. Oh gosh, the work she's done. Yes. And modern street photographers, like I said, Alex Webb and stuff. But Dorothy Lange is she's one of my heroes. Amazing stuff, just amazing.
Yeah, so glad. Thank you, Neil, for giving a shout out to Dorothea Lange. I love her photographs as well. And Neil's coming to us all the way from Brisbane, Australia, as a BFA student there. So thank you for that question. Okay, Mark, I think we have another one.
Yes. Ron, what's the best way to purchase your work?
Probably through the website, or you can talk to Amanda as well.
So do you want to tell them what your website is, how to find it?
Yeah, it's RenatoRampolla.com. RenatoRampolla.com. As I showed earlier, I have 2 magazines out, and then I have a revision of my Dignity book with some new photos in it, and a really good printing job on it through Blurb. And then, of course, there's the original one, and I have links to the Museum of Art, St. Pete Museum of Art, where they have books there, and the Art of Photographic Museum, FAMOPA, they have books there as well.
Thank you. And I see Heather went ahead and put the full address also in the chat section. And Steve followed up and asked, do you plan to do any work during COVID with people en masse?
I might do that, yeah. Right now, I've been so stoked about doing this introspection. Ideas keep flowing, and I start something and never comes up the idea, but something else comes up. So it's just like I haven't exhausted that yet. I'm really enjoying that. But yes, I do want to do that as well, because I love the eyes, and the eyes are still there.
It portends of things to come, perhaps, next series. So thank you, everyone, for your comments and your questions. Really appreciated you being here. As our reception comes to a close, I want to remind you all that the show will be open until December 10th in our 3rd floor gallery at the Dale Mabry Campus. To come see it for yourself, all you need to do is book an appointment on our website, hccfl.edu/gallery221, or if you follow us on Instagram, just click the link in our bio for book an appointment.
I would like to thank Amanda, Emiliano, and Mark, because they were just amazingly cautious with my father's work, especially because my father's work is 50 and 60 years old. So I'm obviously very protective of it, and they did an amazing job. And then there's so much into how they made it interplay. It looks so good. I mean, they did a great job taking pictures and so forth, but it doesn't do it justice until you see it in person, because the way they put everything together, it just amazed me. I've seen my father's work all the time. I've seen my work all the time, but to see it, the way they interwove them together, it's just amazing. It's really worth taking a look at in person.
Yes, thank you, Amanda, Emiliano, and Mark.
Thank you all.
I'm in love with their layout of the exhibit.
Yeah. To that, and you definitely are an artist. at that.
Thank you. There really is no substitute for really just seeing the work in person and having that direct connection. You can always visit the images we've shared today, and we'll be sharing them in just a little bit as well. But yeah, come see us. 30-minute appointments, groups of 4 at a time. It's very simple to book. So we're playing a slideshow that we shared at the beginning with exhibition photographs. And also, as I mentioned at the start, we'll share recordings by Selena with some of her labels for the show, but not all of them. You have to come see the show for the remaining. I'd like to also take the opportunity to invite any of you to come back to see us at our next virtual event, which will take place on October 15th in conjunction with our public art project Nest. The event's called Designing Public Spaces and be a live art demonstration led by Tori Tepp, who's the creative lead for Nest, from 12:30 to 1:45 p.m. To participate in any of our virtual events, just like tonight, all you need to do is register for free in Eventbrite, and you get your Zoom link as an email for your ticket. So we're so glad you were all able to join us tonight for our reception celebrating the opening of Rampolla, 3 Generations Illuminating Human Dignity. Thank you, Selena. Thank you, Ron, so much for your time. You're so very generous. And for everyone else, take care and be well.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Good night, everyone. During the 1960s, my grandfather Frank influenced a cabal of artists while he worked as a professor at the Ringling School of Art in Sarasota. Well known by many for his distinct figurative expressionism style of painting, he was a favorite professor of many students, and most considered him an example of an artist's artist. When my father Renato was 5 years old, my grandfather painted a portrait of him and made him appear a couple of years older than his age. My grandmother Doris questioned this portrait at first, since it did not resemble my father at the time. However, my grandfather assured her that their son would look like the portrait in a couple of years. I have collected similar stories about my grandfather from my father, and he collected these stories from his mother. Since Frank passed away when my father was 11 years old, my grandmother raised my father alone. My grandmother kept all of my grandfather's artwork safe and kept her memories of him fresh for many years. I never spoke with Frank Rampolla. The closest connection I have with him is through his artwork, which best represents his passion for revealing the visceral, intrinsic nature of humanity. This artistic exploration of humanity is a thread that connects my grandfather and my father's work, spanning across many decades. Growing up surrounded by both of their artwork inspired me to research my grandfather's work and define its relevance to the present while drawing connections to my father's photography as he created Dignity No Matter What and Introspection series. In the portrait series by my father, Renato, Dignity No Matter What, you see each person's freckles, the patterns in their eyes, and the mix of hues in their hair. These portraits tell you about the subject, the photographer, and the viewer. How the subject presents themselves, what details the photographer chose to capture about the subject, and how you interpret the portrait. My father captured the essence of humanity behind the label of homelessness. I've observed my father while he took some of these portraits. His camera is his only piece of equipment, and he typically enjoys spending the day walking while capturing photos. He approaches and talks to anyone that seems interesting to him, someone with unique physical features that contribute to their personality. Depending on the dynamic of the conversation, he asks if he can take their portrait. Rather than highlighting their circumstances, the portraits focus on the face of the individual, which forces you to gaze into their eyes as if you were speaking with them yourself. His most recent series, Introspection, conveys aspects of human emotion through layers, shapes, colors, and figures. They are all untitled to allow the viewer to determine the emotion evoked in each portrait for themselves. My father did not take any new photos for this series. Instead, he scanned through the hundreds of photos he kept but did not post online, and he spent hours on his computer combining and creating these files filled with emotional essences that matched the music he listened to during the editing process.